can only be attributable to human error.
You're entering Paranormal.
Where will we go next? Just phantom from another time.
No one, Mr. Muller.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
That is one big pile of shit.
Hello, I'm Eli Watson.
I'm Jasmine with.
I'm Karac St. Laurent.
And you're listening to
Cryptid
Campfire.
Wow. Welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of the Ropen, where we came back with updated information and hard-hitting facts.
Yeah. So at this point, the original Ropen episode that you guys did, it was Eli, Karac, and Alex. I wasn't present for that. And it was released on our Patreon as a Patreon exclusive. If you're seeing this episode, then that means we have already released that episode to the public. So if you haven't listened to that one, you should go and listen to that one first, Ropen Part 1. Obviously, Alex isn't here today. I'm here instead, kind of a little switcheroo from the original episode. And what'll be interesting about today's discussion is that all of the information I know about the Ropen comes from that original episode. I have not actually done any outside additional research for this revisit. I listened to the episode last night, so it is very fresh, and I'm excited to learn what updates have been made, because according to Eli and Karac, there have been some recent discoveries and revelations that may change some of the opinions expressed in our original episode.
I think that's a good way to put that.
Thank you.
Get ready. If you guys were fans of the original Ropen episode, get ready to have it torn to pieces.
Well, that's the process, right? Is you have to tear apart what's not viable anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that quote from Star Wars. We win by destroying what we hate, not protecting what we love. Is that how
You have
it
that
goes?
the other way around, actually.
Oh, it's okay.
So,
The Last Jedi wasn't very good anyway, so.
Mind, which is the much more destructive course.
Well, I figure we'll hit it fast and quick, I guess. The kind of base description, location, considering we covered that pretty extensively in the first episode. So,
and that remains the same despite all of the new stuff we're going to be talking about today. The general description and location
widely it remains the same. There are some differences, I would say, but I don't recall our covering of it enough to know exactly which ones. So,
well, let's go down the list then. Place of origin, Papua New Guinea. Has that changed?
No, not really. There have been other cases that authors have referred to as Ropen cases, but in terms of the terminology of the word Ropen, that is specifically a New Guinean term. It means different things on different parts of the islands, but it's essentially under one umbrella for, flying creature.
That's actually pretty interesting.
Eli?
Yeah, so
no.
Oh, yes.
Just kidding.
Continuing the list, just a few fun facts about Papua New Guinea. There's roughly 8 million people who live there, 151 known languages, and it is one of the least explored culturally and geographically areas on planet Earth.
Absolutely.
Let me take this opportunity to thank y'all for watching Cryptid Campfire and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Papua New Guinea is part of an island that's above Australia, correct?
Yes. I believe it's part of New Guinea. Or no. I believe the whole island is called Papua New Guinea. And then there's Papua, and then there's New Guinea. And that's
there's also, it's kind of regional. too, because you have several islands that are considered part of the nation of Papua New Guinea that are under different names. So, for instance, Jonathan Whitcomb's book on the Ropen mainly takes place on a place called Umboy Island, which is
Right.
a small island in the network of islands that is called Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
Yes. And it's part of correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's part of Indonesia. Is it?
I don't know if it's counted as part of Indonesia, actually. I don't know
It-
that for sure.
It's right there. Let's see. I'm gonna look it up.
Go for it.
Oh, you're right. It's an independent state. It lives on its own.
Yeah.
But they're right
Well-
there geographically. I mean, they're right next
Well,
to
they
Indonesia.
used to be part of the same landmass as Australia when Pangaea was splitting up. And what happened was Australia split off from kind of roughly where Indonesia is right now. And as it drifted, it broke apart a second time, and that formed Papua New Guinea. And then mainland Australia sailed a bit more, well, it moved a bit more southward, and that's where you have the orientation you have now.
Hmm. Thank you for enlightening us. So, how does this make Ropen real?
How does this make Ropen real? It doesn't necessarily.
Well, let's get down to brass tacks here. Why did we reconvene all these years later?
All these years, these decades, these eons, even.
These
Well,
decades.
Because you and I were exposed a bit more to the literature that exists for Ropen research, as opposed to a lot of what you hear online, which, I think it's the important thing about reading literature in a field, especially like this, is that what you hear otherwise tends to be interpretations of literature. And at that point, it becomes like third-hand interpretation of literature. Oh, well, my buddy read the book and he said this about it, 25 years ago. And it's like, well, that could be a mistranslation. There could be a problem with remembering what exactly the text said. And so a lot of it is hard to rely on if it's a subject that's niche, like the Ropen. The Ropen's not like Sasquatch, right? Where there's a lot of newspaper documentation, track casts. There's tons and tons of Sasquatch historians who know these by heart and can convene and say like, hey, yeah, we have these stories about these reports straight. This is a subject that's mainly covered right now by like 2 or 3 people. And before that, 2 people. And before that, 1 person. And it's in an area of the world that we as a Western society don't really interact that much with. So there's a very narrow channel for information to accurately come through. So
Let me ask you. So the first person was Evelyn Cheeseman, yes?
yeah, she's considered the first person to mention the Ropen in Western writing, and she described specifically Ropen lights, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And that was in a book that she was writing on the insects of Papua New Guinea, because she was, I'm forgetting the name for the term now, but she was a scientist who studied insect species.
Entomologist.
Yes, thank you, yeah. So-
I had an entomologist as my physics professor once.
Really? I was going to say,
Yeah,
that's a
that didn't-
strange
that
occupation
didn't-
for an entomologist.
Anyways, but the book I believe that she was working on was called The Two Roads of Papua,
Yes.
which you and I have not been able to find online.
No, I think I may have seen a copy. No. Oh, what was it? I swear I found a copy online at some point, but it may have been out of stock, something like that.
Yeah. So let me clarify what I mean by that is like we're looking beyond PDF copies of this. We're trying to find a physical, actual copy of this thing, and we just
Yeah.
cannot find it anywhere.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And go on, Jasmine, go on.
I was just going to say, forgive me for maybe backtracking, but I don't think we actually explained
Oh.
the physical description of the Ropen yet. I think
No.
we
Yes.
jumped ahead.
Right.
yes, you're correct. So what is rope? How about Jasmine? Why don't you tell us what a Ropen is, or what
Well-
you think it is?
What I think it is, based on your previous episode about the Ropen, is it is a pterodactyl / pterosaur like creature that may or may not have feathers, may or may not have a tail, and may or may not be bioluminescent, which that's why we had mentioned a couple minutes ago a light being seen.
Mhm.
Now, my biggest question with the lights, there was a lot of stories that you guys told in that first episode about people who had seen lights and attributed it to a Ropen sighting. I cannot picture it. I do not understand. You're telling me that it is it because when I hear light in the sky, I picture like an orb, like a circular light in the sky. Are we saying that the Ropen has potentially glow in the dark spots, or because you've also said that they pulsate between like 4 and 5 seconds? Like, what are the lights? I've looked up artist renditions of the Ropen, and a lot of fan art and drawings and things like that show it as having just like, it's just like glowing all over. So like if you were to see it in the sky, it would be like a glowing pterodactyl or pterosaur flying through the sky. But from the stories that you guys told, it sounded to me like you even compared it to lightning bugs in the sky. My brain doesn't comprehend how a pterosaur can look like lightning bugs at all. Can you explain it to me? What am I missing? Because as someone who didn't know anything about the Ropen, listening to you guys tell the stories about lights being seen and attributed to the Ropen, it makes zero sense to me.
Right, fair enough. Yeah. So, and this is kind of clarified by both reading the literature on it and as well as looking at the research of people like Rex Yappy, wherein he's had interviews with people who say specifically when they've seen this creature that there's been a light of some kind on the body. They've described where the light is. In most of the reports that I'm now aware of, where witnesses describe where the light is on the body, it is usually located at the end of some kind of tail. So what I guess that might indicate is, well, it's tough. I guess when I think of that, what I think of is, well, you know, from far enough away, it looks, I guess you could call it like an orb if you are far enough away from it, because, you know, your sight kind of condenses things as they get more distant. But if you were to look at that kind of thing up close, let's say on a feathered tail and also a non-feathered tail, because there is that sort of debate with are Ropens described as having feathers or not. Feathers would kind of be hard to see that happening on, just to picture it. But I guess it would be something like when you have a fluorescent substance and you see it under UV light on an object that's like darker. So I picture it kind of like that, where there's a sheen to these feathers that it looks like you're looking at them under a UV light. So kind of like a glow in the dark sort of texture like you were talking about, Jasmine. But probably more brilliant than that, I imagine, if it's called a light per se.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I think I had forgot about this until re-listening to the older episode. Was I forget even where it came from, but the idea of the bioluminescence being a sort of ooze that comes off of the Ropen.
Yeah. I had I made a post. Did I make a post about that? I don't think I did actually, but someone pointed it out to me. I think it might have been you, Eli, and it was either that or someone else who I was talking with about the Ropen. And one thing that I thought was interesting about that, not to jump ahead too far, was that, I mean, that just seems almost like a natural, I shouldn't say a natural evolution, but it doesn't seem that far-fetched in terms of the mating displays that we see in tropical birds, for example, because, you know, they puff up their chests 3 times the size of what it seems like they should be. So it's already kind of a pretty incredible looking act. And what is it supposed to be? It's supposed to display colors, these very bright, vibrant images that any animal from anywhere could pick out like instantly. So when I think especially of like secreting a substance that gives off that kind of brilliant light reflection, and we do know of substances that do that. There's a study that we should probably link in this that in short describes the fact that under the right conditions, and if you brighten up certain types of photography enough, you're actually able to see the fact that humans are at a very low level bioluminescent, and all animals probably are. And that is because there's a particular type of enzyme that, when active with other types of cells in the body, actually gives off light. It gives off photons, basically. We can't see it with the naked eye. Most animals probably can't, because it is exceedingly low levels of light. You would have to really, you've got to dig deep into a scientific image to get it. But when I think of that, I think of, I shouldn't say who's to say, but it's not implausible then to think, well, maybe we just have areas of the body on an animal like this, if it does exist, where those enzymes are collected. And that's actually been beneficial for this animal in getting mating rituals going, because they're more effective in terms that they can actually make their tails light up, and that's attractive to females, maybe, or something.
Now,
Which is all hypothetical. None of that has any, there is no research that directly suggests that. But I thought it was interesting.
Well, here, getting even more into the theoretical side of things, here's another possible theory, because you got me thinking with the feathers and the fact that this ooze is off, quote unquote, is it possible that it's some sort of covering that they put on themselves, that they find in a cave somewhere? Because we know there's bioluminescent bugs that, or glowworms, for instance, and their secretions are glowy, hypothetically, you could cover yourself in them and then you would be bioluminescent. You think it's possible, Ropen, maybe they put it on for whatever reason and then it flies off when they're flying around.
That wouldn't have the pulsating effect though, would it? Because bioluminescent.
Yeah, it would have to be something that the body itself is creating to some degree. Whether it's whatever it is, if it's anything.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, Jasmine, what did that answer for you about Ropen descriptions exactly? Because you described it pretty well, I would say, in terms of the kind of the lack of clarity that sort of exists. And I would say that after reading the literature, I have some more clarity on it, but it's definitely still one of those you have a few sightings that are kind of, that's a bit weird even for this, so it's odd. It's odd in that way.
Yeah. Some of the other things I didn't mention just yet was that the wingspan is between 10 and 20 feet. It's got I heard both a pelican-like bill and or a crocodile type mouth, with some sort of appendage on the back of its head that, depending on the angle it's flying, may not be actually visible. But regarding my question I had about the lights, because I had been wondering, I was is it the eyes that glow? What's going on?
Oh, I see what you're asking. Right. Yeah. No, it is physical parts of the body. It's usually not, as far as I can tell, there's no description of the whole body glowing. It's usually the end of the tail emits some kind of bulbous, like a light bulb, almost like a light.
Gotcha. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. There's a few descriptions that say that the light seems to come from the chest or the whatever parts of the wings would not be the limb. So if I had a wing here and it was either feathers or a membrane somewhere in this area is giving off light of some kind.
Gotcha.
Those are in the minority. It seems to be mostly chest and tail from what I can tell.
Gotcha.
And sometimes it's just kind of, you can't tell. There are many reports that say, well, we see this light come down from the mountain and it goes and it pulsates and it flies out over to the reef and then it goes out and then it comes back a few hours later. And people assume that to be a Ropen feeding actually at coastal reef areas. And, from that far away, it's just, it's a light. We assume it's the Ropen. We can't tell what part of the body necessarily is glowing there.
Gotcha.
Right. So, and that's kind of, you mentioned the wingspan. And I think that is a great segue into talking about the problems that I've become aware of with a lot of the existing Ropen research. So the main few researchers we have on the subject are Neil Gessman, who I haven't seen a whole lot of work from. I'm not familiar with him entirely, but we have Jonathan Whitcomb is kind of doing the most, or has done the most, I should say. Paul Nation was kind of his predecessor in that way. And right now we also have Rex Yappy, who's a Papua New Guinean native. He's the first non-Western researcher doing work on this subject academically. And what I thought was interesting when you mentioned the wingspan, the whole 15 to 20 foot, it brings up one of the problems that exists in Whitcomb's book, which has 4 versions. Eli has the 4th version, and I have the 2nd edition. It's called Searching for Ropens. And I recently, just about maybe half a month ago, finished reading it. And one of the things that popped up as a very it's a deeply rooted issue, I think, in a lot of the research, is the problem of translation, which is the fact that there are translation problems is by no part a fault of Jonathan Whitcomb or the people he's talking to. There's a thick language barrier. So, for instance, in at least 3 different cases, he talks about, I'm not sure if this guy was telling me that each wing was 20 feet long, or if the wingspan as a whole was 20 feet. There's even one where he says, I think the guy added the total wingspan and then the tail length together to get this number. And that segues into another whole host of issues, which is, and I say this in the most objective way that I can, because I do think that Jonathan Whitcomb has brought wider attention to a very interesting case. But I think his interpretation of the data is premature, is what I would say. It's very premature. And he makes no secret that that's kind of a possibility. Jonathan Whitcomb's a very devoutly religious person. And he makes very clear in the opening chapters of the book, I am interested in this case because living dinosaurs could potentially support the idea of young Earth creationism, which is the camp he falls into with that. And I have respect for the fact that he's open about that. A lot of people wouldn't be. And that would make things a bit more devious in that way, let's say. But his goals are clear, and he makes no attempt to hide them. But I think that it skews his interpretation of data. And, well, something, where to begin with that? Well, let's take the example of the person who he believes may have added the tail lengths and the wing lengths together when he asked him about the wingspan. The problem that seems to exist with that is Jonathan Whitcomb's book outlines this very common depiction, this kind of conglomerate image from reports that have been put together to describe visually the Ropen. So let's say you gather 100 different Ropen reports and you look at all their characteristics and you're like, I want to draw a sketch that encapsulates most of the commonalities, let's say. And he uses that sketch throughout most of this. And of course, it's a pterosaur. Now, one of the problems that I encountered with that, especially in cases like the adding thing, was, for one thing, obviously there's translation errors happening if you're not sure what he was saying. So, we're not sure what he's saying is what that means. We're not entirely clear. And if that's the case, what should we do with that? Well, we should probably hold it off until we're clear on what was being said. Instead, it's added into to fit into that particular model with the ratio of the tail to the wings. And I don't think it's a goal of the authors to skew the data purposefully to fit it, but I think that it's one of the consequences of the way in which he conducted research while he was on Umboy. And I'm sorry if I'm taking up a lot of talking here. Does anyone want to say something?
No, but what are you trying to say here? That he's conflating total length here?
I'm saying that this is one of the examples, and I guess it's kind of, you could say, a mathematical one because it deals with proportions and adding numbers and things like that. But it's an example of, well, we have this report that isn't quite clear on what it's saying, but we have this model that fits most of the other reports. So instead of trying to reconvene with that person who's an outlier in that data and figure out, is this report an outlier, or is there a translation error that I'm hearing this guy wrong, or he's hearing me wrong or something? Instead, they kind of took the information, looked at it, and were like, how can this clearly we've had a translation error here. But instead of consulting the guy about the translation error, they were like, how do we fix this without needing to consult him so that it makes sense for this model that we have?
Mm-hmm.
So, Eli, if I was studying polar bears for the first time and I was speaking to the native tribes that exist up in Alaska and asking them what they knew about polar bears, and one guy didn't get what I said, and I asked him how many let's say how many feet long the tail was on a polar bear. And he thought that I asked him how many limbs it has, and he told me 4. And then obviously to me, I'm like, well, that doesn't fit the rest of the descriptions. It would be like if I didn't ask him again, or if I didn't try to reconsult with him to get potentially better information, and instead walked over to my desk and thought, okay, how do I make this fit the paradigm that I'm working with?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is that does accidentally skew data potentially, right? Because now it's not, I need more accurate data. It's let me fix this data. Let me fix this to make sense instead of whatever else might be the case. Not everything has to
you're not,
category.
it's not truthful anymore at that point.
And I don't think it's intentional by any means, but it's a mistake, and it's kind of a grave one for research, I would say. So, and a lot of the subject is kind of riddled with that in some way, because you also have some more, what I would say are conflations that really get into dangerous territory, I would say. One of them, I actually have a bookmark right here because I want to show it. And I'll send some images too for you to use when you're editing this, Eli. There is a guy they talked to, Dixon, who I would like to note for starters, he draws a pretty, it looks like a pterodactyl. So what we're to make of that, I don't know. And this isn't speaking to Dixon's validity one way or the other. But they're talking to him and Whitcomb and some friends are talking to him about his sighting that he's had. And granted, in the text, it is not mentioned once that they ask Dixon about what his elders or what his grandfather said about the Ropen. They were asking him about what he saw, right? And at the end, like they do for a lot of them, they ask him to draw it. And so he drew it. And it didn't exactly fit their model. So this is what he ends up giving them. And there's a few differences. So the tail is different and the head is not held parallel to the body. And there's differences in the wingspan. There's a lot of differences kind of in proportion to what they have as their model for the Ropen on this particular research expedition. This took place in, I think, 2001, if I'm not mistaken. And to account for that, the conclusion is reached by the researchers that Dixon did not draw what he saw. He drew what people in his family said the Ropen looked like. Which I really have to say is, it doesn't make any sense because that's not what they were asking him about. And, if Dixon had problems with understanding that last question and thought that out of the blue, they asked him to draw not what he saw, but what his family what his family says it looks like, you would think he would either think to himself, well, clearly I've heard that wrong, so I'll draw what I saw. Or you would ask, because that's kind of out of context, weirdly enough. And it doesn't mean that that is a thing that occurs in everyone's mind, obviously. But the fact that it was pushed out instantly, this was not included as viable Ropen data because it did not match the paradigm. And that's a problem because the Ropen doesn't match the paradigm. So if we're going to talk about outliers in data, we need to be able to look at this kind of thing and think, well, we have a weird outlier and we don't know what to do about it, but we can't just throw it out. So let's make a new category for Ropen outlier data or something like that. Or consider, again, asking him the question again, which is not said to have been done in the book.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is they leave the eyewitness and then they interpret the data after they get confused about something without consulting the eyewitness again, which is what you would do what seems reasonable to do if you want to clarify a problem with a description, right? You want to go to the person who gave you that description and say, hey, this is kind of weird. Can we do this again to make sure I have this right? Bring a different translator maybe this time too, or bring both of them, and maybe they can say like, oh yeah, I got this word wrong, sorry. And the other person's like, oh, no worries, I've got that word down, I know what he's talking about. Because one word difference can mean the entire world. And there's one more gripe that I want to bring up, and this is the last one. I promise. So this one, I think, might be, what was that?
You're good.
I think this might be the most, in the existing Ropen data, in terms of the accidental mishandling of research methodology, this might be the most
egregious.
Egregious and dangerous in terms of you're taking a risk here that I don't think is understood, sort of thing. So the problem, the shame, I should say, being that it really is actually a great idea on the surface. And the idea is, well, we're getting some different descriptions. Let's come up with a sheet. And this sheet is going to have, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, 34 different silhouettes of animals on it. We're going to have some bats, because we know that there are bats in Papua New Guinea. And we also know, fun fact, that Ropen also means flying fox on one of the islands. It means different things in different dialects. The most popular use being it just means flying thing in general. So we're going to have some bats, we're going to have some birds, and we're going to have some pterosaurs, because again, he's taking this living pterosaur angle. And again, there are some sightings that kind of suggest that. Most of them describe a down or sort of almost hairy covering. And from a distance, it's hard to tell because there's not really a lot of up close sightings. It's hard to tell, okay, are they talking about weird looking feathers, which could exist in a bird? Or are we talking like actual proto feathers that things like pterosaurs had? And there's a few that say no feathers, but again, seen from a distance, a frigate bird looks like it has no feathers. So it's hard to tell. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so they put together this sheet, which is, again, I think a great idea on the surface. There's a problem, though, a massive problem. Out of the 34 silhouettes, 22 of them are pterosaurs. So you have, let's see, 22, 34, what is that? You have about, I think there were more birds labeled than bats. I think there were 5 bats and 7 birds silhouettes, something like that.
What was the total silhouettes again? You said
34, I think. I think it was 34. So 20, I know for a fact the number is that there's 34 and 22 of them are pterosaurs.
So that's 64%.
Yeah, and there's a problem with that, right in the bat. But let's think of an analogy that works well here. I gave this to Eli last night. So as someone who hasn't read the book, Jasmine, I'll give this to you because I think, again, it's very important that we talk to people who haven't been entrenched in this for the past 3 months.
Okay.
So let's say that science is not yet aware of the snake-necked turtle. Do you know what that looks like?
The what? I'm sorry?
It's a snake-necked turtle, which is an actual species. And it's like a turtle. It's regular. It's like the size of maybe like a box turtle or something.
Okay.
Red turtle size. And it just has a long neck is what it is.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the neck is maybe 2 to 3 times the length of the head, something like that. So let's say science is not yet aware of that, right? You're driving past a pond and you look out your window. It's a very clear day and you see a snake-necked turtle crawl out of the water. He looks around. You're looking at this and you're like, what is that? Obviously, it turns around and it waddles back into the lake and that's it. That's the end of your sighting, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm in the area looking into sightings of strange animals in the water. And I come to you and I have this sheet and I give it to you and I say, I want you to pick out what looks the closest to what you saw, right? Got 34 figures on it. 22 of them are plesiosaurs. I don't give you size estimates on there. I don't tell you that a plesiosaur is like the size of a bus. Right. So you have all of these short neck turtles and you're like, yeah, that's pretty close, I guess, but the head's all wrong, right? Maybe you've got 6 salamanders and you're like, yeah, the neck looks right, but the body's all wrong. You see a plesiosaur, especially if they're all top down views and there's a plesiosaur with a rounder abdomen to it. It looks like a shell. And you're like, yeah, I saw one of those. So now I think that you've seen a plesiosaur. So that's the problem, right? And he makes the point, most people pick out the same exact pterosaur, which is a type of pterosaur. I'm going to butcher the name. I think it's rhembidactoid, something like that, which is basically a pterosaur that had this very long tail with a shape at the end, usually like a diamond shaped thing at the end. Smaller bodies, long wings, things like that, tucked in feet. Which is fair enough. But the thing is that especially with our modern understanding of plesiosaur anatomy, just because, sorry, not plesiosaur, pterosaur, just because something looks like a pterosaur no longer means that it was one. If you see paleo art now of Quetzalcoatlus, for example, it looks like an overgrown pelican, for God's sake. I mean, it's so incredibly close to what we have today for avian species. So the problem is that just because this person's picked out this model does not mean it is this model. It means that they've picked the closest thing that you have on this list, because the list isn't expansive enough, or at least, at the very least, very potentially, because the list is not expansive enough, right? Especially if you are dealing with maybe an unknown species of avian that has a longer tail. The only thing that would match that really is the frigate bird, and maybe even then the head's wrong or something. So it's that conundrum, and that's a dangerous conundrum for research. That is a trap, is what that is. And I think that the early 2000s Ropen research, by and large, with some exceptions, fell into that trap. So that is kind of, I guess I would say, the extent of my correction on what I said a year ago on this podcast. My main point being, I think that a year ago I said Jonathan Whitcomb started out approaching this very level-headedly and maybe got off on the line somewhere. And now I would say I think that by and large from the start, not just by Whitcomb, by the way, but he stumbled onto a very interesting subject. He put value into it, which is fine. But there's a misinterpretation and mishandling of the data going on there. So, and again, that's by and large, but not every piece of Ropen data is actually like that. There's some very interesting pieces of data that others alongside him have collected. And again, he collects very interesting sightings as well. So it's not like he doesn't contribute at all or something like that. He draws attention to this really, really well. He's a really good author in the first half of this book as well. And some of his colleagues, like Paul Nation, have some very interesting data, which is the Ropen Lights video, or at least one of them. It's the most conclusive one that we have. So if one you want to talk about that, you can go right ahead, because I don't want to take too much of the spotlight here.
Sure. I don't have much on that, the Paul Nation video, actually. So,
okay. Well, I can talk about it if need be then.
Is there somewhere that I can see it?
Yes, there is. So there's the easiest way that I know of it, because the URL is kind of a long one, is you can either look up Paul Nation Ropen Lights and you'll eventually find the right video on YouTube. There's actually a scientific paper written about it too that I did a video on a while ago. And in the description of that video, it's called An Analysis of Ropen Lights. There's a link to that paper. And that paper is what I think makes the Paul Nation case so interesting. So he was a researcher who comes from the same angle as Jonathan Whitcomb, but he's got this video of these two lights, and they're stable, is the thing. And this is the area that this happened in is actually photographed during the day as well in one of the books. And they're so interesting because, well, they're stable, so they're not planes. It's not aircraft, right? So they're not aircraft. But if you place them where Paul Nation at least says this happened, they're in midair, essentially. They're at least at the very top of this hill, so they're pretty high up. And they got together with two people who are, one of them has worked in missile defense analysis for quite a long time. And the other person, I think, is a physicist. And I forget their names right off the bat, unfortunately. And again, to clarify, both of those people are of the creationist side of things. Most people they work with in those circles are, because they're kind of like-minded in that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. What's interesting, though, is that they didn't, until Whitcomb published his commentary on it, because he posted a version of the paper as well with his commentary that throws in a lot of pterosaur stuff. They analyzed it so objectively. And you're looking at all these diagrams, and the conclusions they come to are just, they don't flicker, so they're probably not campfires. There's no roads up there, so they're not car headlights parked up there. Plus, there's not a lot of cars out there, so who's driving a car up there? And, the weirdest thing that they discovered was that there is a solid center to both of these lights, and they're independent of each other. So they're not like the same thing getting obstructed. So there's a solid center that's radiating light outward, which what that suggests is that it's not the same thing as a flashlight where when you shine it, the light is bright in the center, right? There's a solid object giving off light. So that's interesting. And they didn't say what that meant. They ruled out what it could be, and they ruled out most conventional explanations, leaving a few, but among them being, well, if you had an animal that could produce light, it would probably kind of look like this solid mass, because an animal's body is a solid mass, giving off a source of light. So Paul Nation's work is quite interesting in that way. And then you have Rex Yappy currently, who's very just, I mean, we'll get to him later a little bit if we can, but he's a class act in terms of interviewing eyewitnesses, is what I would say.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to find the Paul Nation footage online.
Yeah, it's hard for me to find because everything that I Google is just about light ropes and then like lamp stores.
Right. Yeah, if you look at Paul Nation Ropen under the videos tab, you might be able to find it that way. I forget honestly how I came across it. I don't think I came across the video itself. In fact, I think I came across the paper first, just by looking up Ropen Paul Nation.
2006. And
right. Well, yeah, because the addendums to this book that make it the second edition talk about the video a bit. Actually, because of that, I think I may be able to find photos at least of.
Well, the photos are more or less easy enough to find.
Yeah, I mean, check this out right here. So this is an enhancement of the two lights you have here. And like is mentioned, you have these solid centers with light being given off by both of them. And here's kind of a radiographic view of that, to where each of these spires, as it goes higher, is a representation of light level or light intensity, let's say. And again, if you look in the center of these 3D models, it drops drastically, which means whatever is in the center is not part of the light. So, and again, these are people who study missiles in the same exact way. So Clifford Paiva is one of the people who examined it. So yeah, I think the book is really, again, it points out a lot of very interesting things, but I think that the research at the time was greatly flawed. So I think it's flawed it in the wrong direction, because what I would say is that, especially considering most sightings, and I'm saying most because there are, I think, upwards of 3 exceptions, one of them being a video of eyewitnesses that is fraught with translation errors and has been for a few decades now. But most sources say it has some kind of fur or feather-like covering. One of Rex Yappy's videos, the guy calls it a bird. But a weird, really big bird with a light at the end of his tail. So that's kind of my critique, I guess, of the Ropen research that has happened up until recently.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. And, you know, in our first episode, I think we were really kind of supportive of Whitcomb's research, and I don't know, it just is a bummer that it was conducted so poorly.
Now, Eli, you had said, because Whitcomb's still around, right? He's
more active now than he was last year, in fact. Yeah, I just noticed that he does like 2-hour live streams on YouTube now.
Because Eli, you had said that you had friend requested him and were going to reach out. Were you ever able to connect?
No. Hold on one second. Sorry. No, I wasn't able to. I'll check right now.
Well-spoken person.
Jonathan Whitcomb says my friend request is still pending.
Wow.
Maybe try reaching out on YouTube. He actually commented on my analysis of Ropen Lights video last year.
Is that so?
It is, yeah. And he attempted to make some clarifications that I don't think I was, for one thing, prepared to have with him, because I wasn't as informed on his research as he was, obviously. And he talks about points that I would have no way of confirming or denying either way, or critiquing for that matter, really, because I didn't have the material. And I want to make clear too, I'm not trying to talk down about Jonathan Whitcomb. And again, I think he brings attention to a very important issue, and I appreciate his honesty as well. But I think he's made some missteps in his research, and I think that he's not alone in that to any degree. And in terms of talking to people on podcasts, I think he would be a very interesting person, because he's very well spoken and he's got a lot to say for sure. So there's that.
Remind me again who the main people are in the current conversation, or even the previous conversation. We have Jonathan Whitcomb.
Right, Jonathan Whitcomb, Rex Yappy, who's native New Guinean. He's the only non-American guy, or non-Western, because I think some of them are actually English. Paul Nation and Neil Gessman. And I have not seen much on Neil Gessman. I do know that he had a sighting, supposedly, and he did sketch it. But he saw it from under. So details of things like Jonathan focuses on, like the head crest and such, are left out. But it's a flying creature with angular wings and a longish tail and a longish neck. So it, again, it falls into that, like, superficially it looks like a pterosaur, but then you see, like a heron, and you're like, oh, that looks kind of like the same thing from below, especially a frigate bird, which are common in New Guinea. And if this is a new species, perhaps it's some kind of offshoot of the frigate bird. They have very triangular, angular wings, and the feathers all come to a point. So it's not like a turkey vulture, but when you see it, you're like, oh, that's got feathers. You see a frigate bird, and you're like, the moment that thing is maybe 60 yards from you, you have no idea what its skin looks like. So.
Did you guys talk about Neil in the first episode? That name doesn't sound familiar to me, but you might have mentioned it.
No, we didn't, I don't think, because I don't think Neil's work is as widely published as Whitcomb is. Yeah. So we had mostly just Whitcomb, what he says and what people say about what he says to work with, essentially. But now, we have his literature, and we have papers written about Paul Nation's findings and things like that, and Rex Yappy's videos. So a lot of it now is becoming firsthand, which is great, I would say, which is fantastic.
Okay, so there's two things I want you to talk about, Karac. There's the most recent, or you did an experiment.
Yes.
With some video footage. And then also I want you to talk about Rex Yappy, because I don't know much about Rex.
Okay. I'll start off with Rex Yappy, because that's actually the shorter answer.
Okay.
And none of us know a whole lot about Rex, because Rex is he's a very independent person. He does not do podcasts, for starters. He wants to do his own research, and he wants to do it not just because he's interested in the subject, but because he feels as though Papua New Guinea has taken a bit of a back seat in cryptozoology, and he'd like to change that. And he's got a YouTube channel called Rex Yappy. It's REX_YAPI. And several of those videos, and this is his most important work, is tapes interviewing eyewitnesses. One of the guys, and he speaks the language, so he can put in accurate subtitles. He's a New Guinean native, actually. Rex Yappy is. And in one of the segments, this one really just blew me away, because you know that it's accurate translation because it's someone who's speaking the same language. So there's subtitles because they're speaking in the native language, but they're accurate subtitles in all likelihood. And the description he gives is very just like, this is like, if you take into account all of the existing Ropen data, and then take into account the mistakes that seemingly were made with it, and then you think to yourself, okay, well, maybe what are we actually hearing descriptions of then? You hear this description and you're like, that sounds like it. That sounds like what we are left with. And what he described, he's a very old dude. He's, I think his name is Popo Poya, something like that. and he's old enough to have been around before there was a lot of Western influence in Papua New Guinea. So he was raised in a village where the kids just kind of ran around naked all day, sort of thing. And he was very young when this happened. And he said that one day this massive bird flew over the village, or one evening. Sorry, I think it's sundown, he said. And it was so monstrous in size that people thought it was actually a monster. There was this belief at the time that villages could curse each other because there were some rival villages, and he had interpreted it that way. And he says he watched it when everyone went inside because they were like screaming and running everywhere because it was just massive and it looked weird, and it had a light at the end of its tail. And he did not say it was featherless. He said it was a bird. And I do not know which word he used for bird. There are several words that mean bird, one of them being Ropen, another one being Indava, if you go to the different islands. Ropen can also mean this weird creature some people talk about sometimes. So can Indava, and Ropen can even mean specifically a type of bat. So it's hard to pin down the terminology exactly. And I don't think he uses the words Ropen or Indava. So he's speaking a different dialect than what I'm familiar with from Whitcomb's writings. But so Rex Yappy has videos like that, which are really just great videos. Anyone who wants to further Ropen knowledge and potential research, look at Rex Yappy, his channel. It's great. So that's the shorter answer. The other question that you asked me, who is Rex Yappy, and what was the other question? I'm sorry, that went on for a bit longer than I thought it would.
Talk about the most recent experiment you conducted. This is regarding Whitcomb's footage.
We mentioned this phenomenon a bit briefly at the beginning of the podcast, where we were talking about what parts of Papua New Guinea use the word Ropen, and I mentioned that there are some researchers who also refer to sightings that are similar from very different places as Ropen sightings. One of them, currently a popular case in South Carolina, actually in the United States. It's referred to right now as the Robin of Raleigh, Raleigh being a city in South Carolina. And the witness in this case is a woman named Cynthia Lee. And she supposedly had a sighting of what she said straight up was a pterosaur, a featherless pterosaur, I think last year or the year before. And supposedly at the end of 2021 got footage of two Ropens, or what Whitcomb would call Ropens, what she would just call pterosaurs, and sent it in to John Whitcomb. And Whitcomb was very impressed by it, and he did a video on it. Examining the footage itself, what happened was she was getting, well, what she says happened was she was getting on a bus on the highway, or to the highway rather, and because of the speed at which the bus was about to start going, she didn't get a whole lot of footage from her phone, but she saw what she said were two pterosaurs, and there were some smaller birds that were following them around, and so she took footage of it. And the footage is available to see in its entirety, and Whitcomb does a playthrough of that and then analyzes it by magnifying it, stabilizing it, and slowing it down on each subject. There's two of them supposedly. And I how do I put that? There are several things that are very self-evident right off the bat, and I don't want this to speak to Whitcomb or Cynthia Lee's characters to any extent. It's an objective analysis. They're clearly birds of prey. They have these triangular fanned-out tails that are very thin at the end, so they don't even fit Whitcomb's model of a Ropen for starters. There are no visible head crests of any kind. The wings are very rectangular and appear to be potentially splayed near the end, but it's blurry because they're far away. Whitcomb did explore in his analysis the possibility that these were crows, which I give him props for, but I think it's evident that they're not crows off the bat because they appear to be larger in proportion than that. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, they're far away, so I can't say that for sure. But they seem to share more in common with something like a hawk or an eagle than a crow in terms of their anatomy, right? Especially the broadness of the wings, for example. Crows have kind of sleek wings. Mm. So the main point that Whitcomb brings up, aside from the fact that he puts faith in Cynthia Lee, is he notices at one point that the flapping is seen rather clearly from when it turns away from the camera, so you can kind of see a behind view of it. Again, it's kind of blurry. But he says that the wings roll as they flap. And what he seems to mean by this is that when they come down, they're in a triangular position like this. But as they roll back up, it's almost like they roll from where on us our shoulders first. So the shoulders come up, then the rest of the arm, and it's almost as though they kind of flow upward and then they're straight when they come down. So straight when they come down, kind of curved when they come up, and he calls that a rolling flap. And he says, what bird flies like this? And off the bat, I was like, well, I've got some answers for that, but I'm also not someone who studies birds, so what do I know? So I happened, when I was just walking home the other day, to see a bird of prey in the sky. And as I was getting farther, I thought to myself, this is a wonderful opportunity. And so I whipped out my phone and I recorded it from, I don't know the distance that Cynthia Lee was from these particular flying animals, but in terms of the amount of space it takes up on the screen, it was pretty similar. And lo and behold, the wings roll if you blur the footage enough. And I didn't need to intentionally blur it. When it went out of focus, you could see it very clearly on the first flap. And you have to slow it down to see it properly, because I kind of come into pan to it almost as it begins. But you see that it comes up. They're almost like upside down U's. They flatten out and they go back down again. It's exactly what's in the Cynthia Lee footage. So there is a continuation of Ropen research, and I think that it's less of it in general, if you took all of it into a bubble, is misguided than before, but there are still pitfalls being fallen into. And that's still as much of a trap as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Duly noted.
But as it still stands, I'm getting the impression that we as a collective are in agreement that there is something strange going on, and that the Ropen is not just a hoax. Absolutely. That was one of the things you guys spoke very strongly about in the first episode, was that, because like in some of the analysis of videos of lights and things like that, multiple people of respect had said, well, it's not man-made, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, and I think that that's the most honest thing that we can say right now. After being exposed, especially to learning about the dialects of the area.
Yeah, which I think you said that there was like 150 different ones.
Yeah, is that what you said, Eli? 150 different languages?
151 languages, yeah, spoken.
Yeah, which is a lot. And in a lot of them, they have words that reference things like this. So there is something going on.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on, but it's not nothing. So that's as much as I think I can accurately postulate on that one. But yeah, I don't think we're looking at a hoax of any kind. I think we're seeing misinterpretation of genuinely, I'll say potentially anomalous data.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, we'll see what the future brings, I guess.
So have there, I know you just talked about the one in Raleigh. So have there not been any other Ropen sightings since, what was the last one? Was it 2006? Paul Nation went back to Papua New Guinea and found more footage.
Oh, we're talking specifically Papua New Guinea?
Yeah.
There are more recent ones, especially from natives. And honestly, off the top of my head, I do not know the years they've taken place.
Gotcha.
Destination Truth and Monster Quest both had more recent sightings talked about.
Oh, okay.
So people can look to those sources too, because Monster Quest is on YouTube now, and the episode on the Ropen on YouTube. It's called The Demon Flyer, which is funny enough. Speaking of all these mistranslations, comes from a mistranslation of one of the words for Ropen. Nice. I think it might specifically be a mistranslation of Indava, but I could be wrong. But yeah, there is no word for demon flyer in those languages. So that's what I recommend to look to new sightings for. And of course, Rex Yappy, because I'm sure that his interviews probably mark dates, at least in years. So.
Cool.
Yeah, pretty wicked cool.
Yeah, pretty wizard, man.
Pretty wizard.
No, that's obviously a lot to digest. I think there's a lot happening there in what you just talked about. So
yeah, it's a multifaceted issue to many extents, because you have the social side of it and you have the scientific end of it and you have even a theological perspective on it, which, that's a philosophy issue, I think, at that point, when you approach the subject and you have to choose between one of those few things. So I would say a lot of it probably is a philosophical issue, and it seems like that's probably the case too, based on the honesty going into it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So when are we going? When are we going to find the Ropen, guys?
I'm going tonight. I'm walking. It's like a 5-minute walk. It's not a big deal.
It's a 5-minute walk, dude. I don't know. I would be scared to go.
Really?
Yeah, but I'd probably do it.
There's a lot of stuff aside from the Ropen that might want to eat you on those islands. That was that was one thing that I found rather charming actually about his writing, was he talks about this cell phone that he bought that can make international calls, and it dies like a week into the trip, and he's like, oh well, I guess my family won't know if I'm alive for the next 3 weeks until I get home.
Wow.
Oh my lord.
So he definitely highlights the drawbacks to some extent. Yeah. That was funny.
Yeah, it's tough terrain, it looks like. So
very much so. Well, especially because it's a chain of islands, you have to move between islands by a boat most of the time over open ocean. We're not talking like small rivers or something. We're talking like, you'll be out in the open sea for about an hour for the smaller trips, which is kind of scary because we're talking areas that have things similar to monsoons. You've got tropical storms a lot. Those are areas where you do not want to be when something like that hits. So it is a deadly endeavor to some extent.
yeah. I wish I had known there was a Monster Quest episode beforehand. I did not realize that.
Did you not know that? Really? I'm very sorry. I thought, for some reason, I thought you and I had talked about it, but I probably...
No.
I remember things that didn't happen like all the time, so that's my fault. Probably.
I don't talk about Monster Quest, I don't even... Just kidding. I don't know where I was going with that.
So it's not good, So.
I didn't make it. No. I've had Doug on the show. Doug's super nice.
Doug is great. Were you there for that talk, Jasmine?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Very interesting.
We've got a good history of connecting with some pretty prominent people. Like we're talking about, there's a Monster Quest episode, and we just may have talked to the person who makes that show. And
right.
Yeah.
It's a shame. You think today, like, man, if things had gone differently, you could have like Leonard Nimoy on to talk about In Search of or something like that.
Oh man, wow.
Wouldn't that have been something? That would have been something.
I've got a connection with Josh Gates. I mean,
do you now? Really?
I do.
Whoa, when are we talking to Josh?
I mean, if you want me to reach out to my contact, I could. We would have to have a reason to have him on, though.
Well, it is a cryptozoology show, so I mean.
True, but we would need to know what we wanted to talk about with him.
You could talk about Destination Truth.
We could, which isn't that show doesn't even exist anymore. Does it,
No.
or did it come back? Because
No,
it's
he's got
Expedition Unknown now.
Yeah, that's right.
It has a spiritual successor in Expedition Unknown. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It has, really.
Is that one still running? That one's still going.
I think
right?
so, but it's not as popular as Expedition X, which is another show that he's doing now.
Oh, really?
Yes. I'm waiting on Unknown X to be the next one, but we'll
That's
see.
funny.
Unknown X.
Wow.
Oh yeah, Expedition X. Is that the one where they went to Ape Canyon?
I think so. Yeah, because Expedition Unknown also expanded beyond cryptozoology, and I think Expedition X does too. They do some stuff that DT did, like like UFO cases, but they also do stuff like archaeology. So, which is really cool.
It's Mark Marcel, who we had on the show, was on Expedition X or one of those shows, and he has something. I don't know. Yeah, they didn't do him good.
Which is not, to be fair, if Josh Gates is watching this to any extent, not the fault of the TV host. It's editing room stuff. There's a massive disconnect there a lot of the time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, from my understanding, Josh Gates is barely in the show. He's like the host, but he's not like boots on the ground.
In Expedition X, in Expedition Unknown, he's on the ground a lot, but Expedition X, he's more of a host. Yeah.
They need to start coming
We
up
can
with
get him to clarify when we have him on.
Yeah, there we go. They need to come up with some clearer names, man, because I'm just Expedition X, Expedition Unknown.
Unsolved this, unsolved that, paranormal this, paranormal that.
Dude, I'm ready for Destination Expedition X Unknown, you know. But I think if we have nothing more to add kind of to the Ropen, maybe it's time to get into the Coliseum battle.
Let's
Yes,
go.
so
I'm
I don't know
ready.
much about this. What is this?
So the Coliseum battle, I will explain. So
Okay.
Karac, one of our, I would say, most successful tomes that we've done in the past was Cryptid Coliseum, where we would speak about a certain cryptid or creature. We'd do a normal episode, you know, how we usually do. But then at the end, we would put that cryptid in a battle with another cryptid that we had previously talked about.
Okay.
And they will battle, and we've rotated who writes those battles and who narrates them and everything like that. So for today we have Eli telling us the story of the battle between the Ropen and the, we'll find out.
You'll find out. And okay, it also needs to be added that over time the Colosseum has been known to change shapes and sizes, and you know, sometimes it has wheels, sometimes it floats in the sky. I think one point it went up into space. So like there's nothing conventional about this. So this is kind of, you know,
there are no rules.
There are no rules. So today's battle begins. I wish Alex was here for this one, man. The people of Papua New Guinea are enjoying their lives.
When suddenly.
So fishing, swimming, doing other Papua New Guinea activities. And suddenly, the fishermen notice a disturbance off the shore. Rumbling water is bubbling in a line, wrapping itself around the island. And slowly but surely, white rocks rise out of the depths. But no, not rocks. It's a connected wall of glorious marble rising higher and higher into the sky. It's the Colosseum. The Colosseum rises up, disturbing the entirety of Papua New Guinea and ripping it from the seafloor.
Jeez. Violent entrance.
I think this is the largest the Colosseum has ever been. So the island of Papua New Guinea now rests on the Colosseum floor. Confused islanders, none the least is Jonathan Whitcomb, are bewildered as an announcer shouts out, "Welcome to the Colosseum."
That's new.
Yeah, figured I'd throw that in there. Crowds cheer. From the innards of the island awakes the Ropen, dozens of them, rising from their cavernous homes as the sounds of a gate opening slowly fills their ears.
This would be Alex's part.
The audience goes wild as from the newly opened gate comes a strange howl. A whoo!
Oh my god!
The giant bat-like creature tries to shy away from the light of the setting sun, but the prospect of eating islanders draws him out. The whole flaps its leathery wings and begins eating them, scooping them up.
What the heck?
Right out the Clash of the Titans stuff. This is just right out the gate.
Scooping them up from their homes, tourists from their hotel rooms, and researchers from their shaky conclusions. The sun the sun fades out.
There goes the Whitcomb interview.
I know, right? The sun fades out on a bloodbath of human carnage. The Ahul takes a break from biting off people's heads to appreciate a shooting star. But it's not a shooting star. It's something else. The light pulsates in and out and moves slowly across the sky, getting closer and closer until, boom, impact. The Ahul is knocked back as a Ropen begins to attack him, and the Ahul swipes it away with one long leathery wing arm. What was I talking
Winged
about?
arm, maybe is what you meant?
A wing arm. I don't know. The Ahul takes flight, unknowingly launching into a swirl of Ropen lights, pulsating around him, fading in and out of the stars around him. The Ahul lets out another howl. Ahul! Its infrasonic frequencies cause some of the Ropen to fall, descending like fallen angels and splatting into the ground.
Oh my god! Children then feast upon them.
The Ahul flies in different parts, around different parts of Papua New Guinea, avoiding rocky precipices and building tops as it's chased by hordes of Ropens. The Ropens splat into walls and rocks in furious attempt to kill the intruder. However, the Ahul's luck comes to an end as he clips a cliff with a wing, and he tumbles and lands on an edge of a large crevasse. The Ropens descend all around him. The Ahul's wing is too damaged to launch again, but it tries anyways. A broken Ahul comes from its lips as its body fills with pain. It recognizes it's been beat and accepts its fate as it succumbs to the monstrous horde of Ropen that begin to eat him alive. Then, when finished with their meal, the Ropen seek out the human survivors and gobble them up. After all, this is their island. An outsider shouldn't have all the fun.
Can the Colosseum like be sued by natives afterwards? That's pretty. They
No,
decided to
just- Dude, it's already destroyed the Amazon rainforest. That's
Yeah, with tank
to be fair, it
wheels.
didn't raise the entire island out of the ocean, so it probably is just completely destroyed.
it's just
Wow.
it's on its way to destroy the world.
Now, the Colosseum wasn't always this violent, I would just like to say. For some reason, we decided this tome that there would be death.
Okay, all right, real stakes. I like it.
But even with that death, they can always return.
That is true.
Okay,
It's
all
like
right.
Looney Tunes.
It's like Looney Tunes.
You could get exploded,
fine.
decapitated, but you'll be back.
The horror that
That
these
was-
cryptids must be experiencing as their bodies are torn apart and put back
Okay.
together.
That was something.
That was something. That was good. That was good.
But thank you for that, Eli.
like
That
Thanks.
was
I had fun.
beautifully written. I feel like you took a lot of time on that and you had it planned way ahead of time, right?
Yes. Yes,
Smile.
totally.
That was great.
Okay, well, we're moving on. So, what are we saying? You can find our sources for today's episode in the blog post on our website.
Our website being cryptidcampfire.com.
Yes, thank you for that. I totally forgot about that bit. Yeah, and then I guess what else do we usually say?
Well, usually all we say is just check out the blog to get those sources. I think we mentioned throughout the episode how a lot of the sources aren't even actually available online. So there's probably going to be a nice little book list on there.
Yeah,
And
usually
then
books is what my recommendation would be.
yeah. And then other than that, I had also previously mentioned that our first Ropen episode was originally a Patreon exclusive. So we want to go ahead and thank one of our Patreon members today. So who would that be, Eli?
Yes, today we're thanking Felicia Kelly Trent, who's been a Patreon supporter since February of last year.
Oh wow.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Felicia.
Thank you.
Other than that, Karac being our guest for today, do you want to pitch where people can find you online and connect with you if they want to?
Sure. Well, the best place is the Crash Course Cryptozoology YouTube channel for seeing any stuff that I put out. And for contact, I've got a Facebook, just Karac sitting around on Facebook. But I also have an email, crash.course.cryptozoology@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and giving us all of that information that you did today. It was a really good analysis. It wasn't so much of a regurgitate information today. It was much more of a analyze and, analyze. Whatever another synonym for analyze is.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that it was because regurgitating it is the least that I wanted to do. So
All right.
It was fun
yeah.
for me, not knowing anything about the Ropen, listening to the first episode, and then joining the conversation today does make me want to read more about it. So hopefully that's the case for any of our listeners today as well.
absolutely.
Extra, read all about it. All right.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you next week.
Goodbye. We want to thank you guys for listening to Cryptid Campfire. We really appreciate it, and we'd appreciate it even more if you left us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps us rank, and more people can find us and join the campfire. If you haven't yet, consider following us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. That's at Cryptid Campfire on all 3. Be sure to check out our website, cryptidcampfire.com, where you can find campfire t-shirts and other merch, as well as our weekly blog, expanding upon what we talk about in the episodes. If you've done all that, consider subscribing to our Patreon page. $5 a month gets you access to exclusive episodes and wallpapers that haven't been released anywhere else. For the price of a coffee, you will be directly helping us make this show the best it can be. If you want to follow our hosts, you can find their personal profiles on Instagram at Jasmine May With, that's JasmineMaewith, at Alex Daikaiju, that's at AlexDaikaiju, and at the Eli Watson. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.